On October 9, 1943, in the pine-scented stillness of Camp Algona, Iowa, a German prisoner of war named Gefreiter Karl-Heinz Moeller held a sheet of paper so thin the light passed through it.
His hands shook, not from cold but from disbelief. A U.S. sergeant stood nearby, not with a rifle raised but with a clipboard, explaining calmly that Moeller could write home. Not a confession, not propaganda. A real letter, uncensored in tone. No punishment attached.
Moeller had spent the previous night awake, replaying everything he had been taught to expect. In the Wehrmacht, letters were a privilege tightly bound to obedience. One careless sentence, one hint of defeatism could summon the Feldgendarmerie. Men vanished for less.
Yet here, thousands of miles from Stalingrad, from the frozen blood in cordite, an enemy uniform was telling him to write to his mother in Hanover. The paper smelled faintly of ink and wood pulp. It was real, too real.
The shock of that moment cannot be understood without understanding where Moeller came from. He had been captured on May 13, 1943, near Cape Bon, Tunisia, after the collapse of Axis forces in North Africa. His unit, the 10th Panzer Division, battered and starving, had fought until ammunition was gone and engines were silent. Surrender had not been a choice, it was gravity. From there, he was shipped across the Atlantic in the belly of a Liberty ship, convinced that captivity meant interrogation, beatings, perhaps execution. That is what German briefings said happened in enemy camps.
Instead, on his third day in Iowa, he was handed stationery. Across the Allied POW system, this moment repeated itself, quietly, almost bureaucratically, thousands of times. Under the 1929 Geneva Convention, which the United States strictly followed, prisoners were entitled to send and receive letters and postcards. The rule was simple: limited length, military information forbidden, but personal words allowed. No reprisals, no hidden traps. For men conditioned by a regime where words were weapons, this felt unreal. In Camp Crossville, Tennessee, Obergefreiter Wilhelm Brandt, a former artilleryman from the 384th Infantry Division, stared at his first outgoing postcard on January 22, 1944. His pencil hovered over the sentence he had already written and erased twice: "I am alive." In Germany, such a statement could be interpreted as morale commentary. Here, the American camp interpreter, a German-speaking corporal from Milwaukee, encouraged him to write more. "Tell them how you're sleeping," the corporal said. "Tell them you're eating." Eating. Brandt's last memory of food before capture near Kharkiv in March 1943 was boiled horse meat and snow melted in a helmet. Now he was being served bread, potatoes, and coffee so strong it stained the tin cup brown. Writing this down felt dangerous, like tempting fate. He expected punishment. None came. Instead, weeks later, a reply arrived. Mail call in the camps was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was a low murmur. Boots shifting on gravel, men standing straighter than usual. When Brandt heard his name, spoken with an American accent that bent the consonants, his chest tightened painfully. And she wrote something that broke him open. "We were told nothing. We feared the worst." Brandt sat on his bunk and wept without sound, the paper trembling in his hands. Not because of grief, but because the enemy had allowed him to be human. This permission to communicate cut directly against Nazi indoctrination. German soldiers had been taught that Allied captivity meant humiliation and silence. Letters home were supposed to be monitored, rewritten, used as tools of psychological warfare. Instead, American camp commandants treated correspondence like ration distribution, regulated, routine, almost dull. That dullness was the shock.
At Camp Hearn, Texas, which housed over 4,800 German POWs by mid-1944, camp records show that prisoners were allowed 2 letters and 4 postcards per month. Censors checked for troop movements and political messaging, not emotion. Prisoners wrote about weather, food, work details, picking cotton or cutting wood. They wrote about missing children they had never met.
Some hesitated. In June 1944, after news of the Normandy landings filtered into camps via newspapers, several prisoners feared writing anything at all. Would mentioning D-Day be seen as collaboration? Camp officials clarified, do not mention battles, but you may write how you feel. For men raised in fear of saying the wrong thing, this freedom felt heavier than chains. Not all letters were hopeful. In August 1944, Unteroffizier Franz Keller, captured with remnants of the 352nd Infantry Division after Omaha Beach, received a letter informing him that his younger brother had been killed near Cannes on July 18th. Keller folded the letter carefully, methodically, as if precision could contain the pain. That night, he wrote back, not to the state, not to a censor, but to his father.
He wrote that he was safe, that he worked in a camp bakery, that he would survive. The guard on night duty heard quiet sobbing and did not intervene. This too was shocking. American policy was not born of kindness alone. It was strategic. U.S. authorities understood that humane treatment reduced escape attempts, increased compliance, and encouraged reciprocity for American POWs in German hands.
But for the men living it, policy blurred into something else, a crack in the moral architecture they had been raised inside. Letters home did what bombs could not. They undermined certainty. Some prisoners later admitted that writing freely made them question everything. If the enemy allowed truth, what did that say about the Reich's fear of it? If Americans trusted them with words, why had their own leaders not? By April 1945, as news of Berlin's encirclement reached the camps, letter writing took on a desperate intensity. Men asked if homes still stood, if wives were alive, if children had been evacuated. Camp mailrooms worked overtime. No punishments followed, no privileges were revoked. When Germany surrendered on May 7, 1945, many prisoners learned of it not from guards, but from letters written days earlier, carrying rumors, grief, and relief across oceans. Years later, veterans would remember battles by sound and smell, but many German POWs remembered captivity by touch, the feel of thin paper between their fingers, the weight of a pencil, the shock of being allowed to speak without fear. In the quiet of those camps, far from the front lines, letters did something radical. They returned a voice to men who had been trained to silence themselves.